The screaming pierced through the fluorescent-lit aisles of Westfield Grocery, like a siren, raw and desperate. 8-year-old Marcus Chen's small body thrashed against the uniformed arms that dragged him toward the automatic doors. His noise-canceling headphones torn away and dangling from one ear. Behind him, his mother Sarah lay face down on the cold linoleum floor. A police officer's knee pressed firmly against her back as zip-tie restraints cut into her wrists. The other shoppers stood frozen, their carts abandoned, watching in stunned silence as what had begun as a routine grocery run transformed into a scene of devastating injustice. 20 minutes earlier, the Chen family had entered the store with their usual careful preparation. Sarah had checked her watch, noting the 10:30 a.m. time slot, when the store would be less crowded, when the harsh overhead lights wouldn't compete with too many voices, when Marcus might have the best chance of completing their weekly shopping without a sensory overload. She had packed his weighted lap pad, his favorite fidget cube, and most importantly, his noise-canceling headphones. The blue ones with the tiny rockets printed on the sides that he'd chosen himself 3 months ago. Marcus had been making remarkable progress with his autism management strategies. At 8 years old, he could now communicate his needs more clearly, use his coping tools effectively, and even enjoyed certain aspects of their grocery adventures. He liked organizing the cart by color, counting items in sets of 3, and always helping his mother reach for the box of vanilla wafers on aisle 7. Today had started no differently, with Marcus carefully adjusting his headphones and taking deep breaths, just as his occupational therapist had taught him. "Ready for our mission, Captain Marcus?" Sarah had asked, using their special code that transformed grocery shopping into a space adventure. "Ready, Mom. Remember, we need 3 green vegetables, 3 proteins, and 3 dairy items." Marcus had replied, his voice slightly muffled by the headphones, but clear with determination. They had navigated the produce section successfully, Marcus carefully selecting 3 perfect apples, while Sarah gathered lettuce and carrots. The rhythmic beeping of distant checkout scanners remained at a manageable level, and Marcus had even smiled when they found his favorite brand of string cheese on sale. Everything seemed to be progressing smoothly until they reached aisle 4, where the store's aging ventilation system chose that moment to emit a sudden, sharp, metallic shriek. The sound cut through Marcus's headphones like a blade. His carefully maintained equilibrium shattered instantly. His hands flew to his ears, pressing the headphones tighter, but the damage was done. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the distant music too loud, the smell of floor cleaner too sharp. His nervous system, already working overtime to process the complex sensory environment, hit its breaking point. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay," Sarah whispered, immediately kneeling beside her son as he began to rock back and forth. She recognized the signs, had lived through hundreds of these moments. "Let's find our quiet space." But Marcus was beyond hearing her words. The world had become too much, too fast, too overwhelming. He began to vocalize his distress, a keening sound that helped his nervous system regulate, but that drew stares from nearby shoppers. Sarah wrapped her arms around him gently, not restraining but offering pressure and security, while scanning for the nearest quiet corner where they could ride out the sensory storm together. That's when Karen Morrison rounded the corner of aisle 4. At 53, Karen prided herself on being a concerned citizen, someone who noticed when things weren't quite right in her community. She saw the rocking child, heard the distressed vocalizations, observed the mother's attempts to calm him, and immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. "Excuse me," Karen announced loudly, her voice cutting through the air with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Is that child having some kind of drug reaction? He doesn't look normal." Sarah looked up, her heart already racing from managing Marcus's meltdown, now forced to navigate an additional social challenge. "He's autistic," she explained patiently, her voice low and steady despite the circumstances. "He's experiencing sensory overload. We just need a few minutes." Karen's expression shifted to one of skepticism, mixed with disgust. In her mind, autism was either a made-up excuse for poor parenting or a condition that should be managed privately, not displayed in public spaces. She had no understanding of neurodiversity, no concept of invisible disabilities, no empathy for the daily challenges faced by families like the Chens. "That's not normal behavior," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "Children don't act like that unless something's wrong. Are you sure you're not giving him something? Some kind of medication?" The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. After years of advocating for her son, educating teachers, fighting insurance companies, and navigating a world that wasn't designed for different minds, she had learned to expect ignorance. But this level of hostility, this immediate assumption of wrongdoing, still had the power to wound. "Please," Sarah said, her voice beginning to shake with both emotion and frustration. "We're not bothering anyone. He just needs a moment to regulate." But Karen had already pulled out her cell phone. In her mind, she was being a hero, a protector of public safety. She had decided that this situation required intervention from authorities who could properly assess what she perceived as a dangerous situation. 911. "Yes. I'm at Westfield Grocery on Maple Street. There's a child here who's acting very strangely. He's making weird noises and rocking back and forth. The mother claims he's autistic, but I think he might be on drugs or having some kind of medical emergency. You need to send someone right away." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what was happening. "Please don't do this," she begged. "He's not in danger. This is just how autism sometimes looks." Karen had already hung up, wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. If that child is really autistic like you claim, then the paramedics can confirm it. If he's not, if you're giving him something or if there's abuse involved, they'll know what to do. The next 8 minutes felt like hours. Marcus's meltdown began to subside naturally as his nervous system slowly regulated, but the damage was done. Sarah could hear the approaching sirens, could see other customers beginning to gather at a distance, could feel the weight of judgment and misunderstanding pressing down on her family like a physical force. When Officer Bradley Martinez and his partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh, entered the store, they were responding to a call about a possibly drugged child and suspicious adult behavior. They had no context for autism, no training in recognizing sensory processing differences, no understanding that what they were seeing was a common experience for neurodivergent children and their families. They saw Marcus, now mostly calm, but still rocking slightly, and Sarah, who was visibly upset and trying to explain the situation in increasingly desperate terms. Two officers trained to look for signs of impairment and dangerous behavior. The scene fit the profile they had been given. "Ma'am, we need you to step away from the child," Officer Martinez commanded, his hand resting on his radio. "We've received reports of concerning behavior." "He's my son," Sarah replied, her voice cracking. "He has autism. This was a sensory meltdown, not a medical emergency. Please, you're making this worse." But Officer Walsh had already approached Marcus, whose nervous system immediately went into high alert at the presence of a stranger. The badge, the uniform, the unfamiliar voice, all combined to trigger another wave of sensory overwhelm. "Son, can you tell me your name?" Officer Walsh asked, not unkindly, but without understanding that direct questions from strangers during a vulnerable moment could be impossible for an autistic child to process and respond to. Marcus began to rock again, unable to verbal respond, his stress mounting rapidly. To the officers, his behavior looked like defiance or impairment. To Karen Morrison, who stood nearby watching with arms crossed, it looked like validation of her suspicions. "See," Karen said loudly, "he can't even answer simple questions. Something is definitely wrong here." What happened next would be dissected in the media for weeks, analyzed in police training seminars, and etched permanently into the Chen family's collective memory. Officer Martinez, interpreting Marcus's continued rocking and Sarah's increasingly frantic explanations as signs of a deteriorating situation, made the decision to physically separate mother from child. "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back. You're being detained for investigation of child endangerment." The words hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. Child endangerment. He's autistic. I'm protecting him. You're the ones endangering him. But her protests only seemed to confirm the officer's suspicions about her state of mind. When she instinctively moved toward Marcus, who was becoming increasingly distressed by the chaos around him, Officer Martinez interpreted her action as resistance. The takedown was swift and brutal. Sarah found herself face down on the grocery store floor, her cheek pressed against linoleum that smelled of industrial cleaner, her hands being forced behind her back while zip ties cut into her wrists. Around her, she could hear Marcus screaming, the sound of her 8-year-old son in absolute terror, as strangers prepared to take him away from the one person who understood his needs. "Please," she gasped against the floor, tears mixing with the taste of blood from where she had bitten her tongue during the fall. "Please don't take him. He needs me. He doesn't understand what's happening." Officer Walsh, now tasked with managing Marcus while her partner dealt with Sarah, found herself completely out of her depth. Marcus's distress had escalated beyond anything she had training to handle. His rocking had become violent thrashing. His vocalizations had become screams, and every attempt she made to calm or redirect him only increased his panic. "We need to get him to the hospital," Officer Walsh radioed dispatch, her voice tight with stress. "Child appears to be having some kind of episode." It was store manager David Kim who finally intervened, though by then, the situation had spiraled far beyond what anyone could easily correct. David had worked at Westfield Grocery for 12 years, had seen the Chen family shop there weekly, had watched Marcus grow and develop, had even helped Sarah navigate particularly challenging shopping trips when Marcus was having difficult days. "Officers, wait!" David called out as he approached the scene, his voice carefully measured to avoid escalating an already volatile situation. "I know this family. The boy does have autism. They're regular customers. There's no emergency here." Officer Martinez looked up from where he was completing Sarah's restraints, sweat beading on his forehead despite the store's air conditioning. "Sir, we received a 911 call reporting suspicious behavior and possible child endangerment. We have to follow protocol." "The person who called 911, David said, gesturing toward Karen Morrison, who was still standing nearby with her arms crossed, "doesn't know this family. I do. That child is not on drugs. He's not being abused. He has autism. And what you just witnessed was a sensory meltdown, which is completely normal for autistic children." Karen Morrison bristled at the implied criticism. "I was trying to help," she snapped. "If that child is really autistic, then maybe he shouldn't be in public places where he can disturb other people." The callousness of her statement hung in the air like smoke. David Kim felt anger rise in his chest. but he forced himself to remain focused on de-escalating the situation. "Mrs. Chen," he said, kneeling near Sarah's prone form, "I'm going to check our security cameras. I'm going to show these officers exactly what happened here today." What the security footage revealed would become the turning point in a case that was about to capture national attention. The cameras, positioned strategically throughout the store for loss prevention, had captured every moment of the Chen family's shopping trip. They showed Marcus carefully selecting apples, helping his mother organize their cart, walking calmly through the aisles with his noise-canceling headphones in place. The footage showed the exact moment the ventilation system malfunctioned, the sharp sound that triggered Marcus's sensory overload. It showed Sarah's immediate, appropriate response, her gentle attempts to calm and redirect her son. It showed Marcus beginning to naturally regulate as his mother provided the pressure and security he needed. Most damning of all, the footage showed Karen Morrison's approach, her aggressive interrogation of a mother trying to manage a challenging situation, and her decision to call 911 despite Sarah's clear explanations about Marcus's autism. Officer Walsh watched the playback with growing unease. In the clear, objective lens of the security camera, the situation looked completely different from how it had seemed in the moment. Instead of a drugged child and negligent mother, she saw a family dealing with disability in a public space, trying to navigate a world that wasn't designed for their needs. "We made a mistake," Officer Walsh said quietly to her partner. But mistakes made in crisis situations can't always be easily undone. Marcus had already been loaded into the ambulance. Despite David Kim's protests and the security footage evidence, his screaming could be heard from the parking lot, a sound that would haunt Sarah for months afterward. She was still restrained, still technically under arrest, though the officers were beginning to realize the magnitude of their error. The release of Sarah's restraints came too late to prevent the trauma, too late to stop Marcus's panic attack in the ambulance, too late to avoid the gathering crowd of onlookers who had pulled out their phones to record the scene. In the age of social media, injustice travels at the speed of light, and the video of an 8-year-old autistic boy being dragged screaming from a grocery store was already being uploaded to multiple platforms. "I need to get to my son," Sarah said as the zip ties fell away from her wrists, leaving deep red marks on her skin. Her voice was steady now, though her hands shook with adrenaline and suppressed rage. "He doesn't understand what's happening to him." Officer Martinez found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to salvage a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. "Ma'am, there was a misunderstanding. We were responding to a call about concerning behavior." "Concerning to whom?" Sarah asked, her eyes locked on Karen Morrison, who was now looking significantly less confident than she had 20 minutes earlier. "Concerning to someone who has never lived with autism, someone who thinks neurodivergent children should be invisible." Karen Morrison shifted uncomfortably under Sarah's gaze. The situation wasn't unfolding the way she had expected. She had anticipated vindication, confirmation that her instincts about suspicious behavior had been correct. Instead, she found herself the subject of hostile stares from other customers and store employees. "I was trying to help," Karen repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. "How was I supposed to know?" "You could have asked," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength as shock gave way to anger. "You could have listened when I explained. You could have shown an ounce of compassion instead of immediately assuming the worst." The ambulance ride to Westfield General Hospital became another chapter in the Chen family's traumatic day. Marcus, strapped to a gurney and surrounded by medical equipment and strangers, experienced what his later therapist would classify as severe acute stress. The paramedics, well-meaning but untrained in autism care, attempted to calm him with techniques that only increased his distress. Sarah, finally reunited with her son after a frantic drive to the hospital, found Marcus in a state she had rarely seen. He was nonverbal, unresponsive to her voice, his body rigid with trauma. It would take hours of patient, gentle intervention before he was able to recognize her presence and begin to slowly emerge from his protective shutdown. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the emergency room physician who examined Marcus, was familiar with autism presentations. She quickly recognized that the child had experienced severe psychological trauma, not a medical emergency. Mrs. Chen, Dr. Hendricks said gently, your son is going to be fine physically, but what happened today was deeply traumatic for him. He's going to need time and support to process this experience. Sarah nodded, still holding Marcus's hand as he slowly began to respond to her presence. What happens now? Do we just go home and pretend this didn't happen? Dr. Hendricks' expression grew serious. Mrs. Chen, what happened today was wrong. An autistic child experiencing a sensory meltdown is not a police matter. It's not a medical emergency. It's a family managing disability in public, and they should be supported, not criminalized. Unknown to the Chen family, their story was already spreading beyond the confines of Westfield Grocery and the local hospital. The cell phone videos taken by bystanders had been shared thousands of times within hours. The footage of Marcus being dragged away, of Sarah being tackled to the ground, had sparked outrage among disability rights advocates, autism parents, and civil rights organizations across the country. Michelle Torres, executive director of the Autism Advocacy Network, was at her desk in San Francisco when the first video crossed her social media feed. She had seen hundreds of similar stories over the years, but something about Marcus's terrified face and Sarah's desperate voice cut through her professional composure. This stops now, Michelle said aloud to her empty office, already reaching for her phone to begin the calls that would mobilize one of the most powerful advocacy campaigns in recent memory. Within 6 hours of the incident, justice for Marcus was trending on multiple social media platforms. Within 12 hours, major news outlets were picking up the story. Within 24 hours, the Westfield Police Department was fielding calls from reporters, civil rights attorneys, and disability advocacy organizations demanding answers. Karen Morrison, meanwhile, was discovering that her decision to call 911 would have consequences she had never anticipated. The viral nature of the videos meant that her face, her voice, and her actions were now subject to public scrutiny on a national scale. Her employer, a local insurance company, received hundreds of calls demanding her termination. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages ranging from criticism to outright threats. I was trying to help, she told her husband, Frank, as they watched the story unfold on the evening news. How could I have known the child was actually autistic? Frank Morrison, a gentleman who had spent 30 years married to Karen, looked at his wife with something approaching disappointment. Maybe the question isn't how you could have known, Karen. Maybe the question is why you assumed the worst. The legal ramifications began to unfold with swift precision. Sarah Chen, armed with security footage and witness testimonies, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Westfield Police Department within a week of the incident. The lawsuit alleged violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, excessive use of force, and failure to provide appropriate accommodations for a disabled child. Attorney David Goldstein, a specialist in disability rights law, took the case pro bono after viewing the security footage. This isn't just about one family, he explained to reporters gathered outside the courthouse. This is about whether autistic children and their families have the right to exist in public spaces without being criminalized for their neurological differences. The Westfield Police Department found itself under intense scrutiny as the case gained national attention. Chief Robert Hayes, a veteran law enforcement officer with 25 years of experience, was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his department's training and response protocols. "We are conducting a thorough internal investigation," Chief Hayes announced at a press conference 3 days after the incident. "We are also implementing mandatory training on autism and disability awareness for all officers." But for many in the autism community, the promise of future training felt insufficient, given the trauma that Marcus and Sarah had endured. The incident had struck a nerve in families who lived daily with the fear that their children's neurological differences might be misunderstood, criminalized, or punished by a society that too often failed to accommodate neurodiversity. Dr. Amanda Ross, a developmental pediatrician and autism researcher at the local university, used the incident as a teaching moment for both the medical community and the general public. In a widely shared op-ed, she wrote, "Autism is not a behavior problem. It's not defiance. It's not poor parenting. It's a neurological difference that affects how individuals process sensory information and communicate with the world around them. When we criminalize autism, we criminalize neurodiversity itself." The community response, however, wasn't limited to professional advocates and legal proceedings. The incident had awakened something powerful in the residents of Westfield, particularly among parents and educators who worked with special needs children. They organized rallies, attended city council meetings, and demanded changes to police training protocols. Jennifer Walsh, the police officer who had initially approached Marcus, found herself deeply affected by the community's response. She volunteered to participate in the first autism awareness training session, where she met other families like the Chens and began to understand the magnitude of her department's mistake. "I became a police officer to help people," Officer Walsh told the training instructor. "What happened that day was the opposite of help. I need to understand how to do better." Marcus himself, meanwhile, was slowly recovering from the trauma with the help of his regular therapy team and his family's unwavering support. Dr. Lisa Park, his behavioral therapist, worked carefully to help him process the experience and rebuild his confidence in public spaces. Trauma affects autistic individuals differently. Dr. Park explained to Sarah during one of their sessions. Marcus's nervous system was already working hard to manage sensory input. The additional trauma of that day created layers of stress that we need to address carefully and patiently. The breakthrough in Marcus's recovery came 3 weeks after the incident, during a therapy session where he was finally able to verbalize his experience. "The loud man scared me," he told Dr. Park, referring to Officer Martinez. "I couldn't make the scared feeling go away." Sarah, listening from the observation room, felt her heart break and heal simultaneously. Her son's ability to express his feelings represented both the depth of his trauma and his incredible resilience. The legal case moved forward with remarkable speed, aided by the clear evidence provided by the store's security cameras. The footage left little room for debate about what had occurred, and the police department's insurance company began pushing for a settlement to avoid a costly and embarrassing trial. Karen Morrison, meanwhile, faced legal consequences of her own. The district attorney, under pressure from advocacy groups and armed with evidence that her 911 call contained false information, filed charges against her for filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services. The right to call 911 is sacred in our society, District Attorney Maria Rodriguez announced. But that right comes with the responsibility to report actual emergencies, not to weaponize emergency services against people whose behavior makes you uncomfortable. Karen's arraignment drew protesters on both sides, though those supporting the charges against her vastly outnumbered those defending her actions. Standing before Judge Patricia Anderson, Karen finally seemed to grasp the full weight of her actions. "Your Honor," Karen said when given the opportunity to speak, "I realize now that my call to 911 was based on ignorance and prejudice, not genuine concern for anyone's safety. I caused immense harm to a family who was simply trying to navigate daily life with autism." Judge Anderson, herself the parent of a child with special needs, looked stern as she addressed Karen. "Ms. Morrison, your actions that day represented more than a mistake in judgment. They represented a fundamental failure to extend basic human compassion to a family dealing with disability. The trauma you caused to an 8-year-old child is immeasurable." The sentence included community service specifically focused on autism awareness, mandatory education about disability rights, and a substantial fine that would be donated to local autism support organizations. More importantly, Karen was required to issue a public apology that would be distributed through the same social media channels that had initially spread the story. The settlement with the police department came 6 months after the incident. While the financial terms remained confidential, the agreement included substantial monetary compensation for the Chen family, mandatory autism training for all police officers in the district, and the creation of a crisis intervention team specifically trained to handle situations involving individuals with disabilities. Chief Hayes, announcing the settlement and the new training protocols, acknowledged the systemic failures that had led to the incident. "We failed Marcus Chen and his family that day. We failed our community. We are committed to ensuring that this never happens again." The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond Westfield. Police departments across the country began implementing similar training programs. Grocery stores and other businesses started providing autism awareness education to their employees. The case became a landmark example in disability rights law and was studied in police academies and law schools nationwide. For Sarah Chen, the victory felt bittersweet. The legal and advocacy successes couldn't undo the trauma her son had experienced, couldn't erase the memory of his terrified face as he was dragged from the store, couldn't fully heal the damage done to their sense of safety in public spaces. But gradually, as months passed and Marcus continued his healing journey, Sarah began to see positive changes in their community and beyond. Store employees who recognized them now offered assistance during difficult moments. Other autism families reached out to share their own stories and strategies. Most importantly, Marcus himself began to show signs of renewed confidence. The day Marcus asked to return to Westfield Grocery, 8 months after the incident, marked a crucial milestone in his recovery. Sarah felt her anxiety spike as they approached the automatic doors, but Marcus seemed determined to reclaim a space that had been taken from him through trauma and misunderstanding. David Kim, the store manager who had intervened that terrible day, was waiting for them with a small team of employees who had volunteered for the new Autism Awareness Training Program. They had prepared a quiet shopping experience, dimming certain lights and ensuring that the ventilation system was functioning properly. "Welcome back, Marcus," David said quietly, offering a gentle smile to the boy who had become a symbol of resilience in their community. Marcus looked around the store carefully, his noise-canceling headphones in place, his mother's hand steady in his. After a long moment, he nodded and picked up a small shopping basket. "I'm ready for our mission, Mom," he said, using their old code phrase. "Let's get 3 green vegetables, 3 proteins, and 3 dairy items." As they walked through the aisles together, Sarah noticed other shoppers watching them with recognition and respect, rather than suspicion and fear. The story of what had happened here had changed more than just policies and training protocols. It had changed hearts and minds, creating space for understanding and acceptance where once there had been only ignorance. The media attention had gradually faded, as it always does, moving on to other stories and other crises. But the changes that had been set in motion by one family's trauma and one community's response continued to spread. Autism advocacy organizations reported increased funding and support. Police departments nationwide requested training materials. Most importantly, other families facing similar challenges knew they weren't alone. Michelle Torres, the advocacy director, who had first mobilized support for the Chen family, reflected on the case's impact during a conference presentation months later. Marcus Chen's story reminded us that true advocacy isn't just about changing laws or policies, she told the audience. It's about changing the fundamental way society sees and supports neurodivergent individuals and their families. Karen Morrison, meanwhile, had undergone her own transformation through the community service and education requirements of her sentence. Working with autism families and learning about the daily challenges they faced had opened her eyes to a world she had never understood or acknowledged. "I can't undo what I did," Karen said during a training session, where she now volunteered to share her story as a cautionary tale. "But I can spend the rest of my life making sure that other people don't make the same mistakes I made. Ignorance isn't an excuse for causing harm." The Chen family's story had become more than a cautionary tale about the dangers of misunderstanding autism. It had become a testament to the power of advocacy, the importance of community support, and the possibility of positive change, even in the aftermath of trauma and injustice. As Marcus completed his shopping mission that day, carefully selecting apples and counting items in sets of 3, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just hope for her son's continued recovery, but hope that the world might be becoming a slightly more understanding, slightly more accepting place for all neurodivergent individuals. The automatic doors opened as they approached the exit, the same doors through which Marcus had been dragged 8 months earlier. This time, he walked through them upright, dignified, and accompanied by a mother whose fierce advocacy had helped change a community. Behind them, the store hummed with the quiet activity of employees who now understood that autism wasn't something to fear or report, but simply another way of experiencing and navigating the world. The story that had begun with screaming and trauma had transformed into something else entirely, a demonstration of resilience, a catalyst for change, and a reminder that even in our darkest moments, the possibility for understanding, justice, and healing remains within reach. Marcus Chen's journey from victim to symbol of hope had illuminated a path forward for countless other families, ensuring that his terrible experience would serve a greater purpose in creating a more inclusive and compassionate society for all.